The morning sun cast a soft glow through the kitchen window, painting the worn oak cabinets in hues of gold. I stood at the counter, carefully stirring cream into my coffee, listening to the sounds of the house that had once been so full of laughter and warmth. Now it felt different, like I was standing in the middle of someone else's life. Footsteps approached, slow and hesitant. My daughter-in-law, Megan, stopped in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. She had that look, the one that told me she'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times already. "Karen," she began, her voice carefully controlled, "I wanted to talk to you about the nursery." My heart sank. Course, the nursery. I'd seen the pastel paint samples, the tiny clothes folded neatly on the changing table. It was their baby, their dream, but part of me had dared to hope that, just maybe, I could be a part of it too. "I think," she continued, her eyes darting to the floor, "it's really important that the baby has their own space. No, a place that's just for them." She hesitated, then looked straight at me. "This room's for the baby, not you." Her words sliced through the morning calm like a jagged blade. I felt the coffee cup trembling in my hand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After all these years, the birthday parties, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the meals I'd cooked, the nights I'd stayed up worrying, this was my place. Or so I thought. I tried to find my voice, but it came out thin and cracked. "Of course, Megan," I managed. "Course, the baby comes first." I set the cup down, steadying myself. "I understand." She sighed with relief, as if I'd made it easy for her. "Thank you," she said, almost too quickly. "We just need to make sure the baby has the best start possible." I nodded, but inside something shifted. I realized that the house I had once helped build had become theirs, not mine. And I didn't want to be a burden, an extra piece of furniture shuffled from room to room. That night I packed my bags, folded each piece of clothing carefully, as if preparing for a journey I hadn't planned. I glanced around the bedroom that had been my refuge, taking in the worn quilt on the bed, the photo frames on the nightstand, my son's wedding picture, my granddaughter's first birthday. Memories, yes, but memories can't hold you forever. Outside, the stars blinked in the velvet sky. I felt a mix of fear and freedom. Tomorrow I would leave. I'd find a place of my own, somewhere I could breathe again. And maybe I'd remember who I was before I'd given everything to everyone else. The next morning, I rose before the sun, quietly slipping out of bed to avoid waking anyone. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, a comforting rhythm that now felt more like a countdown. I stood in the kitchen, my packed suitcase by my feet. I ran my hand along the counter, remembering all the mornings I'd stood here, preparing breakfasts, packing lunches, greeting sleepy faces with a smile. A pang of nostalgia tugged at my heart, but I shook it off. This was a new chapter. I reminded myself my chapter, Megan and my son David, were still asleep. I left a note on the table. "I've decided it's time for me to find a place of my own. I wish you both and the baby all the happiness in the world. Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine. No guilt. No drama. Just the truth." I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my old Honda and paused for a moment, staring at the house. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass and distant ocean air. A small smile crept across my face. I pulled out of the driveway and merged onto the coastal highway, the early sun painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The road curved along the edge of the cliffs, revealing glimpses of the ocean below. Waves crashed against the rocks, the white foam dancing in the breeze. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt. I'd found a listing for a small condo on the beach, modest but perfect for me. It wasn't fancy, but it had a balcony that overlooked the ocean. And I could already imagine sipping coffee there while listening to the waves. When I arrived, the real estate agent was waiting, a young woman with a kind smile and sun-kissed. "Hair, Mrs. Harris?" she asked. I liked that she called me by my name, not just Mom or Grandma, just. My voice firm. a quiet strength in it that I hadn't felt in years. She led me upstairs. The place was small, a living room with a worn but comfortable couch, a kitchenette that smelled faintly of salt and lemon, and a bedroom with a window that framed the sea like a painting. "It's not brand new," she said, "but it's cozy, and the neighbors are friendly." I nodded, running my fingers along the windowsill. Outside, the ocean sparkled, waves rolling in with the promise of something new. "I'll take it," I said. Her face lit up. "Wonderful. We'll get the paperwork started today." As she bustled about, I wandered to the balcony. The sea air filled my lungs crisp and clean. I leaned on the railing and closed my eyes, letting the sound of the waves wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in someone else's story. This was mine. I thought of David and Megan and the baby soon to come. They'd be okay. They'd build their family, make their memories, and I would build mine. I let out a deep, cleansing sigh. I hadn't realized how much I'd been. Holding in a new chapter awaited, one I would write on my own terms. The first few days in the beach condo felt like stepping into a quiet, gentle dream. I unpacked my boxes slowly, one at a time, savoring the feeling of making a space my own. The walls were a soft cream color, and the living room window framed. The ocean like a living painting. Every morning, I brewed my coffee and stepped onto the balcony to watch the sunrise. The sky shifted from lavender to gold, and the waves rolled in with a comforting rhythm. It was a peaceful contrast to the constant buzz of the house I'd left behind. One morning, I noticed a small farmer's market setting up on the boardwalk, just down the street. Drawn by curiosity and a bit of loneliness, I walked over, pulling a sweater tight around me against the sea breeze. Vendors were setting up colorful stalls, bright fruits, homemade candles, woven baskets. The scent of fresh bread and coffee drifted through the air. A man in a straw hat was arranging baskets of oranges, and a young woman with a braid was arranging jars of local honey. "Good morning," she called out with a warm smile. "Morning," I replied, surprised at how easily the word came out. "First time at the market?" she asked, noticing my cautious expression. "First time at this one?" I said with a small laugh. "I just moved here." "Oh, welcome," she beamed. "Jenna, if you need any recommendations or a friendly face, I'm usually here on Saturdays." Her kindness warmed me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, Jenna," I said. "I'm Karen." I bought a jar of honey and a small loaf of crusty bread. As I walked back to the condo, the sun rose higher, casting everything in, a soft golden light. Inside, I put the bread on the kitchen counter and opened the honey, tasting it on a spoon. Sweet, but with a faint tang of the sea. Local, authentic. Felt like a little gift from the town itself. Later that afternoon, I took a walk along the shore. The sand was warm beneath my feet, and the salty air wrapped around me like a hug. I passed couples holding hands, children chasing each other, and a few older men sitting on benches with fishing rods and thermoses. I found a quiet spot near a patch of seagrass and sat down. Waves lapped at the sand, steady and endless. I felt small in the best possible way, like part of something bigger than myself. A few days ago, I'd been afraid of being alone. But here, with the sea and the sand and the sky stretching wide before me, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was David, my son. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was soft, uncertain. "Just wanted to check in. How's everything going?" I hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "It's good, David," I said, surprised at how true it felt. "The condo is small, but it's perfect for me. And the ocean." I paused, taking in the view. "It's beautiful." He was quiet for a moment. "Glad, Mom. I really am." "I hope you and Megan are settling in too," I said. "Yeah, we are," he replied. "The baby's room is, well, it's coming along." I smiled even, though he couldn't see it. "That's wonderful," I said. "Take care of each other, okay?" "Of course. And Mom, just want you to be happy." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I will be, I said. I promise. As I hung up, I watched the horizon where the sky met the sea. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was expanding rather than shrinking. This was my time now, and I was ready to embrace it. My first week at the condo passed in a gentle rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the balcony, afternoons spent exploring the town, evenings walking the shore. Each day felt like a small act of reclamation, a reminder that I was still growing, still changing. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, I decided to visit the small laundry room at the end of the hall. My old washer and dryer were back at David's house, and now I had to navigate shared machines and the faint scent of detergent in the air. As I folded my clothes, a door creaked open and a tall woman with a shock of curly gray hair peeked. In she wore a loose linen shirt and carried a basket brimming with brightly colored towels. "Hi there," she said, her voice rich and warm. "I haven't seen you before. New in town?" I nodded, smiling. "Yes, I just moved into Unit 304. I'm Karen." "Welcome, Karen. I'm Nancy, Unit 302. She plopped her basket on the counter. "I've been here for about 5 years now. Moved after my divorce. Best decision I ever made." Her easy honesty made me feel instantly at ease. "Oh, I know what you mean," I said, chuckling softly. "I'm starting fresh too." She gave me a knowing look. "Well, you picked the right place. It's quiet, but not too quiet, if you know what I mean. And everyone looks out for each other." We chatted as we folded our clothes, swapping little stories about our lives. Nancy had 2 grown children who lived in Boston, and she'd recently started volunteering at the local community center. "Every Wednesday we have a little potluck on the beach," she said. "You should come by. It's nothing fancy, just some food, a bonfire, good company." My heart swelled with gratitude. It had been years since someone had invited me somewhere just because they wanted me there, not out of obligation. "I'd love to," I said. "Great," she beamed. "See you tomorrow evening then." That night, I found myself smiling as I arranged my small living room, a secondhand bookshelf, a cozy armchair near the window, the photos I'd brought from the old house. I placed them carefully. David as a boy, his gap-toothed grin. Megan. And David on their wedding day. My granddaughter's first birthday. Each photo was a reminder of the life I'd built, the love I'd given. But now, it was time to build something new for myself. The next day. I stood on the sand with Nancy and a handful of other residents. The sun was sinking low, turning the ocean into a shimmering expanse of gold. Someone had built a small bonfire, its glow flickering against the deepening blue sky. Nancy handed me a paper plate piled high with pasta salad and grilled vegetables. "Eat," she said, "and then you're going to tell us all about yourself." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its lightness, as the waves rolled in and laughter echoed around me. I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. Here, among these strangers turned friends, I wasn't just David's mom or Megan's mother-in-law. I was Karen, a woman with her own story, her own dreams, her own second chance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The morning after the potluck, I woke up with a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The laughter from the night before still echoed in my mind, stories shared around the fire. The smell of charred marshmallows, the quiet understanding that everyone there had carried their own burdens at one time or another. I made my way to the small cafe down the boardwalk, a place called Seabreeze. The smell of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls drifted out through the open door, drawing me in like a magnet. "Morning, Karen." The barista, a young man named Luke, called out. He'd memorized my name after just a few visits. "Morning, Luke," I said, settling into a small table by the window. "I think I'll try one of those cinnamon rolls today." He winked. "Good choice. They're the best in town." I watched as he placed the order and busied himself behind the counter, his movements quick and practiced. Outside, the ocean stretched into forever, waves rolling in, steady and calm, as I took my first bite of the warm, gooey roll. A wave of sweetness washed over me, and I nearly laughed at how simple yet profound the pleasure was. Back at the condo later that afternoon, I found Nancy waiting at my door with a mischievous grin. I was just on my way out, yes, and thought you might like to come with me. There's a local craft fair at the park and they've got live music. A part of me hesitated. It felt strange to be asked along, like I was a teenager again, unsure of where I fit in. But another part of me, the part that had packed that suitcase and left behind everything familiar, was ready. Sure, I said. That sounds wonderful. We walked together along the boardwalk, the late afternoon sun warm on our faces. Nancy pointed out landmarks along the way, the pier where she loved to fish, the small library she sometimes volunteered at, the seafood shack that served the best clam chowder at the park. A small crowd had gathered. Stalls lined the paths, selling everything from handmade jewelry to watercolor paintings of the ocean. A young woman sat on a stool strumming an acoustic guitar and singing. With a voice that was equal parts fragile and strong, Nancy stopped at a booth selling pottery, admiring a small turquoise vase. "Look at this," she said. "It'd be perfect on your windowsill." I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was simple but beautiful, the glaze catching the light like the sea itself. "You know what?" said, surprising myself. "I think I'll buy it." Nancy smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Good for you." We wandered from stall to stall, chatting with the vendors, sampling local jams and pickles. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of independence, not the kind that came from being needed or depended on, but the kind that comes from choosing your own path. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fair, I carried my new vase carefully in a small paper bag. Wasn't just a piece of pottery, it was a symbol. When I got home, I placed it on the windowsill in the living room. The light caught the turquoise glaze, reflecting a soft, calming glow. I sat down and let the hush of the ocean fill the room. I realized that in this place, in this small but growing life I was building, I wasn't defined by what I'd left behind, but by the possibilities that stretched out in front of me here. In this town by the sea, I was learning to belong to myself again. The next morning dawned foggy and cool, the kind of coastal morning that blurred the line between sea and sky. I woke early, my body still adjusting to the rhythm of this new life. I made a pot of coffee and stood by the window, watching the mist drift over the sand like a soft gray blanket. It felt like the world was holding its breath. After breakfast, I decided to tackle the last box I hadn't unpacked yet, the one labeled Memories. It had sat in the corner of my bedroom since I moved in, a silent testament to everything I'd carried with me from my old life. I pulled it over to the bed and carefully lifted the lid. Inside were old photo albums, a few yellowed letters from my mother and a stack of birthday cards from David, some dating back to when he could barely write his own name. My fingers traced the familiar curves of his handwriting. "To Mom, I love you," one card said. The letters wobbly but filled with so much earnestness that tears sprang to my eyes. I set the cards aside and pulled out a small wooden jewelry box. It had been a gift from my husband, now gone for almost 15 years. Inside, a delicate gold necklace nestled against the velvet lining, a tiny heart-shaped pendant. I held it up to the light, remembering the way he'd slipped it around my neck one evening after dinner. "For all the love you've given us," he'd said. I'd almost forgotten how his voice had sounded, warm and steady, like the man he'd always been. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. I set the necklace down and wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand. When I opened the door, Nancy was standing there, her eyes kind. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, "but I made too much lemon bread this morning. I thought you might like a slice." I laughed softly, the sound of it breaking through the fog of my memories. "You're a lifesaver," I said. Stepping aside to let her in, she handed me a small plate, the sweet citrusy scent filling the room. "Everything okay?" she asked gently, noticing the open box on the bed. "Yeah," I said, hesitating. "It's going through some old things. It's funny how the past can still reach out and grab you sometimes." Nancy sat down on the edge of the bed, her presence calm and steady. "It's not funny at all," she said. "It means you loved deeply. And that's nothing to be ashamed of." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Sometimes I wonder if I did enough. If I was a good enough mother, a good enough wife." She placed a comforting hand on mine. "Karen, you gave them everything you had. And now it's okay to give something to yourself." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I took a bite of the lemon bread, sweet, with just the right amount of tartness. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. We spent the next hour talking, sharing stories about our families, our losses, our small triumphs. Nancy's husband had left her when their kids were in college, and she'd rebuilt her life piece by piece. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments that we find ourselves again, she said, her eyes shining. When she left, I closed the box of memories and slid it under the bed. I wasn't throwing anything away. It's choosing to live in the present rather than being held hostage by the past. I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. The fog had begun to lift, revealing the gentle roll of the waves and the promise of a new day. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. It was early evening when I heard the knock at my door, not the polite tap of a neighbor, but a firm, uncertain rap that made my heart skip a beat. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Standing there, shifting from foot to foot, was David. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice low and hesitant. For a second, I couldn't find my words. It had only been a couple of weeks since I left, but he looked older, wearier. The faint lines around his eyes seemed deeper. "David," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the small living room. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you," I replied, closing the door behind him. "It's different, but it's home." He nodded, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "I guess I just wanted to see how you were doing." I gestured toward the small kitchen table. "Sit down," I said. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be great," he said, sinking into the chair with a sigh. As I filled the kettle, the silence between us felt thick. So much left unsaid. When I set the mug in front of him, he looked up at me, eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. Regret, guilt, love, maybe all three. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry about everything. About how Megan handled things. About how I didn't stand up for you more." I sat down across from him, letting his words sink in. "David," I said gently, "you don't have to apologize for her choices. Or even for yours. I know you're trying to be a good husband and father. That's important." He shook his head. "Yeah, but you're important too. You helped us build that. Home, you've always been there for me, and I don't know how to make it right." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Sometimes making it right doesn't mean changing the past," I said. "It means being here now. It means showing up." He squeezed my hand. "I miss you," he whispered, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "I miss you too," I said. "But I'm learning to be okay. I've got good people around me, okay? And I'm figuring out who I am again." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I'm glad. I hope you know how much I love you." "I do," I said. "I've always known that." We sat in silence for a moment, the ocean breeze drifting through the open window, carrying with it the scent of salt and possibility. "Mom," he said finally, "can I come back sometime? Not just to visit, but to really talk." I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. "Of course. This is still your home too. Kate, maybe not in the same way, but you'll always be welcome." He let out a breath as if he'd been holding it in for weeks. "Thanks, Mom." When he stood to leave, he pulled me into a tight hug, the kind I hadn't felt since he was a boy. Knees scraped from riding his bike too fast as I watched him walk down the hall. I realized something. Letting go didn't mean losing everything. It meant making space for new connections, new beginnings. The condo felt brighter, the air fresher. I stood by the window and watched the sun dip below, the horizon painting the sky in hues of orange and pink dot. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The days after David's visit settled into a gentle rhythm, like the tide itself, steady, predictable, comforting. The condo no longer felt like a temporary stopover, but a home. Each morning, I'd open the curtains to let the light flood, in a small but deliberate act that felt like greeting the day with open arms. Nancy stopped by often, always with some small gift, a seashell she'd found on her morning walk, a recipe for a new salad, a flyer for a book club at the library. She treated me not as a guest, but as a friend. And it did wonders for my heart. One afternoon, I ventured into the town center, a modest collection of shops, a post office, and a tiny diner. I needed a few things: dish soap, a new kitchen towel, but mostly, I wanted to remind myself that I belonged here at the hardware store. A man in his 60s with a sunburned face and a ball cap greeted me with a warm smile. "New around here, huh?" he said, his voice rough but kind. "Sort." "Oh," I replied. "Moved into the condos down by the water." "Ah, the old seaside place," he said, nodding. "Good folks over there. I'm Tom." "Karen," I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. "Well, Karen, if you ever need anything fixed or painted or moved, you come find me. I do odd jobs around here, keeps me out of trouble." I laughed, feeling the tension slip from my shoulders. "I'll keep that in mind, Tom. Thank you." When I got back to the condo, I set the small bag of supplies on the counter and looked around. The turquoise vase from the craft fair sat on the windowsill, catching the afternoon light. Next to it, I placed a small potted succulent I'd picked. Up at the market, a tiny green reminder that even in unfamiliar soil, things can grow. Later that week, Nancy convinced me to join her for the community center's weekly painting class. "It's not about being good," she'd said. "It's about showing up, about letting yourself try." So I went, armed with nothing but curiosity. The class was held in a sunlit room with big windows that overlooked the sea. Easels lined the walls, and the smell of paint and canvas filled the air. I picked a spot near the back, letting the hum of conversation wash over me. The instructor, a lively woman named Marta, introduced herself with a flourish. "Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're painting seascapes. But remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. So let it come from the heart." I dipped my brush into the blue paint, feeling a twinge of self-doubt. But as I made the first stroke, something inside me loosened. The brush danced across the canvas, clumsy but free, the color mixing with the white to create soft waves. For an hour I was lost in the motion, the smell of paint, the sound of laughter, the slow, soothing rhythm of creation. At the end of class, Marta walked by and glanced at my painting. "Lovely," she said with a warm smile. "It feels peaceful." I looked at the canvas, a simple, imperfect seascape, and felt a wave of pride. "Thank you," I whispered, more to myself than to her. On the walk home, the salty air felt like a balm. And I realized that this small town, with its simple pleasures and kind people, was becoming my own. I wasn't just passing through. I was putting down roots. Saturday mornings had become my quiet ritual, a cup of coffee on the balcony, sun inching over the horizon, and the sound of the waves a steady companion. But that morning, as I took a sip and let the salt air fill my lungs, my phone buzzed. On the table beside me, I glanced at the screen. Megan. A twinge of unease settled in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I did, in my own way. But our relationship had always felt delicate, like a bridge that might collapse under. "Too much weight?" I answered, my voice soft. "Hello." "Hi, Karen," she said, her tone careful. I hope it's okay that I called." "Of course," I said, my heart picking up speed. There was a pause on the line, as if she were gathering her thoughts. I wanted to ask, "Would you like to come visit the baby's room?" Finally finished setting it up, and David thought, we both thought, might be nice for you to see it. I closed my eyes, feeling a swirl of emotions: surprise, relief, a cautious hope. "I'd love to," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Great," she said, a hint of warmth in her voice. "Maybe tomorrow afternoon? We'd love to. Have you over?" After we hung up, I sat on the balcony for a long time watching the waves roll in. For so long, I'd felt like an outsider in their home, a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. But now this small invitation felt like a thread reaching across the distance, a chance to mend what had frayed. The next afternoon, I dressed carefully: a soft blue blouse that made my eyes look bright, a pair of comfortable slacks. I took the bus into town, feeling a familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. David met me at the door, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hey, Mom," he said, pulling me into a gentle hug. "Hi, sweetheart," I murmured, hugging him back. Megan was waiting in the living room, the baby, a beautiful, chubby-cheeked little girl in her arms. "Hi, Karen," she said, a shy smile playing at her lips. "This is Emily." I felt tears sting my eyes. She's perfect," I whispered. Megan's smile softened. "We'd love for you to be part of her life," she said, her voice trembling. "I know things were tense, but I want Emily to know her grandmother." Something inside me unknotted, like a breath I'd been holding for too long. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means everything to me." David led me to the nursery. The walls were a soft yellow, with a white crib nestled against one corner and a rocking chair by the window. A mobile of tiny sea creatures, a nod to the nearby ocean, hung above the crib, spinning lazily. "It's beautiful," I said, running my fingers along the edge of the crib. Megan stood beside me, her eyes a little wet. "I'm sorry, Karen," she whispered, "for everything. I didn't mean to push you away. I was just scared, overwhelmed." I turned to her and took her hand. "We all were," I said, "but I'm here now, and I want to be part of her life. And yours." She nodded, her lips trembling in a smile. "We'd like that." Really? As I held baby Emily in my arms for the first time, I felt a sense of healing I hadn't thought possible. The little girl's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, all the pain and distance felt like it was melting away. I rocked her gently, listening to her soft breaths, and realized that family wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, even when it was hard. It was about loving, even when it hurt. And as the sun dipped below the horizon outside, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write day by day with all the love I had to give. The days after visiting Emily's nursery unfolded with a fragile but hopeful rhythm. I found myself looking forward to the weekly calls from David, quick check-ins that sometimes turned into longer conversations about the baby's milestones, or the small joys and frustrations of parenthood. Megan surprised me with an invitation to help pick out Emily's first stroller. "I'd love your opinion," she'd said, her voice hesitant but genuine. As I stood in the baby store, surrounded by pastel onesies and rows of strollers with features I never knew existed, I realized how far we'd come. Megan walked beside me, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, her eyes still shadowed by the exhaustion of new motherhood. "This one has good reviews," she said, pointing to a sleek model with sturdy wheels. I ran my hand along the handle, feeling the weight of the moment. "It looks solid," I said. "Easy to maneuver and safe." She smiled, her relief palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. Afterward, we shared a coffee at a small cafe near the beach. It was the first time I'd sat with her like this. Just the two of us, without the weight of tension pressing down on us. "I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome," she said suddenly, her voice low. I don't know. I felt like I had to protect my space. "It's my new family." Stirred my coffee, letting her words settle between us. "I understand," I said finally. "It's hard to figure out where everyone fits when everything is changing." I didn't want to be in the way, but I also didn't want to disappear. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't want you to disappear, Karen. I want you here. For Emily, for us. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm here, I said. It's gonna always be here. Walking back to my condo that evening, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the sand. The ocean was calm, its rhythm steady and sure. I thought about the baby's small fingers gripping mine, about Megan's tears and David's quiet strength. When I got home, I called Nancy. Hey, she said, her voice warm and bright. How'd it go? I sank into my couch, a smile spreading across my face. Better than I could have hoped. We're rebuilding, slowly, but it feels good. Nancy let out a contented sigh. Told you this place would heal you. Something about the ocean makes everything clearer. I glanced out the window at the darkening sky, stars just beginning to peek through. You were right, I said. I feel like I'm finally finding my place. Like I'm allowed to be me. Good, she said, because you deserve that. Karen, you really do. That night, I pulled out the small turquoise vase and placed a single white daisy in it. Simple, hopeful, a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, something beautiful could grow. The moonlight spilled across the room, painting everything in silver. I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a sense that life, even with its twists and heartaches, had given me a gift I hadn't expected, the chance to start again. And in that stillness, promised myself that I would keep showing up for David, for Megan, for Emily, and most of all, for myself. A week after my coffee with Megan, the clouds rolled in thick and heavy, turning the sky a deep gray. The ocean churned with a restless energy, the waves crashing against the shore with a force that rattled my windows. It was the kind of storm that demanded your attention, the kind that reminded you that nature's power was vast and indifferent. Inside my condo, the wind whistled through the cracks around the balcony door, and the rain drummed a steady rhythm. On the roof, I wrapped myself in a knitted shawl and settled on the couch. The turquoise vase with its single daisy now drooping but still clinging to its beauty, just as I reached for my book. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen. David. Hi, sweetheart, I answered, my voice bright, despite the worry gnawing at my chest. Hey, Mom. His voice was tight, strained. Listen, the storm knocked out our power and Emily's been fussy all afternoon. Megan's exhausted. I hate to ask, but I felt a surge of protective instinct. You want to bring her here? I finished for him. Would you mind? Just for a few hours until the power's back. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said. Bring her over. 15 minutes later, David arrived at my door, his hair damp from the rain, Emily bundled in his arms, her tiny face peaked. Out from a pink hat, eyes wide and uncertain. Hey, sweet girl, I cooed, reaching for her. She let out a soft whimper, but I held her close, feeling her warm weight settle against my chest. Thank you, Mom, David said, his eyes tired but grateful. I don't know what we'd do without you. Go home, I said gently. Help. Megan, I've got this. He hesitated. You're sure? I smiled. Positive. After he left, I carried Emily to the couch and rocked her gently. The storm outside raged, but in here it was warm and safe. I hummed softly, an old lullaby I used to sing to David when he was a baby. She quieted, her tiny hand curling around my finger. Look at you, I whispered, my heart swelling, so small, so new. You're going to have a wonderful life, Emily. The power flickered but stayed on. I turned on a small lamp, casting a soft glow over the room. Outside, the rain lashed against the glass, but inside, I felt a quiet strength. I thought about the day I'd packed my bags and left the house I'd helped build. The ache of rejection, the fear of the unknown. Now, sitting here with my granddaughter, I realized that leaving hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of a different kind of home. One that didn't rely on a physical space, but on the people I loved and the person I was becoming. When David returned a few hours later, the worst of the storm had passed. He stood in the doorway, his eyes soft as he watched me rock Emily. She's asleep, I whispered. He stepped forward, his voice quiet. You're amazing, Mom. I mean that. I smiled. pressing a kiss to Emily's forehead before gently handing her back. "She's easy to love," I said. As David left, Emily snuggled against his chest. And I stood in the doorway, the rain easing into a gentle drizzle. The sky began to clear, a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. I closed the door, leaning against it, a smile playing on my lips. The storm had come and gone. But what remained was stronger than any wind or rain. The bonds we were rebuilding, the small acts of love that made all the difference. And as I looked around my cozy condo, the waves softly lapping the shore once more, I knew that even when storms came, and they always would, I had found my anchor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleansed, sun-washed town that smelled of salt and possibility. I stood on my balcony that morning, a cup of coffee warming my hands as I watched the waves roll in. Each one like a small promise that life was always moving forward. It had been months since I'd moved to the beach condo, and each day felt like a tiny affirmation that I'd made the right choice. The fear and doubt that had once clung to me had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I had faced the unknown and found not just a place to live, but a home, one I had built for myself. On my own terms, Nancy and I had become inseparable. Weekly painting classes, long walks by the water, evenings sharing stories over glasses of wine. She'd taught me how to cast a fishing line from the pier, though I still had more luck hooking seaweed than actual fish. One morning, she knocked on my door, a broad smile on her face. "Guess who's hosting the community potluck this week?" she said, eyes twinkling. I raised an eyebrow. "You?" She shook her head. "You?" My stomach flipped. "Me?" "Don't worry," she laughed. "I'll help." Everyone's excited. They've been dying to see your place. The thought of my small condo filling with neighbors' laughter and the smell of home-cooked food made my heart flutter with a mix of excitement and nerves. But then I thought about everything I'd learned here. That home was less about walls and more about the people you shared it with. When Saturday arrived, I bustled around the kitchen, assembling a spread of dishes that reminded me of my old life but also celebrated my new one. A hearty chicken casserole, fresh bread from the local bakery, salad made from vegetables I'd bought at the farmer's market. As the sun dipped low and the first guests trickled in, my condo filled with the hum of conversation and the sound of music playing softly from my small stereo. Nancy was the first to arrive, carrying a lemon pie that made the room smell like summer. "Look at you," she said, hugging me tightly. "The hostess with the mostest." I laughed, feeling a glow of pride. A little later, David and Megan walked in. Emily, in a soft pink dress, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar faces. I scooped her up and felt her warm little body relax against mine. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. David pulled me into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks for inviting us, Mom." I squeezed his hand. "Thanks for coming. This is your home too, whenever you want it to be." Megan smiled at me, her eyes warm. "You've made a beautiful place here, Karen," she said. "I'm glad you're part of our lives, part of Emily's life." I looked around at the room, neighbors chatting over plates of food, the ocean breeze drifting through the open window, Emily's laughter mixing with the hum of conversation. In that moment, I felt something click into place. Life wasn't about clinging to what had been or mourning what was lost. It was about stepping forward even when it was hard and choosing to live, to love, to open your doors and let the world in. As I set Emily down and watched her toddle unsteadily toward the coffee table, I felt a wave of gratitude for the second chances, for the strength I'd discovered in myself, for the people who had become my family, both by blood and by choice. The sun had fully set now, stars beginning to prick the sky. I stood by the window, the ocean a dark, steady presence, and knew that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning a story of resilience, of rediscovery, of finding light even after the darkest storms. And his laughter rose around me. I smiled, knowing that the best chapters of my life were still to come.